Hello students, I hope you are all fine and in good health. In this audio presentation, I will start with the drama Mother's Day. At first, let me go through the list of the characters. The first important character is Mrs. Annie Pearson. She is the main protagonist of this drama, followed by George Pearson. George Pearson, he is the husband of Mrs. Annie Pearson. Doris Pearson, Cyril Pearson, daughter and son of Mrs. Annie Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald. Mrs. Fitzgerald, she is the neighbor of Mrs. Annie Pearson. The scene, let me discuss few important portions from the scene. The scene is actually the living room of the Pearson family, and it is afternoon. I am coming a bit downwards because the entire description is not required, only some of the important portions are required. When the curtain rises, it is an afternoon in early autumn and the stage can be well lit. So we get some information. The time is afternoon and it is autumn season, and apart from that, it is the living room of the Pearson family. We also get that information also. Now we will get some information about two main characters. As you know, the entire drama revolves around Mrs. Pearson, and she is there. Along with her, Mrs. Fitzgerald is also there, and you can see the stage direction. It is written Mrs. Pearson at right and Mrs. Fitzgerald at left, and they are sitting opposite each other at the small table, on which are two teacups and saucers and the cards with which Mrs. Fitzgerald has been telling Mrs. Pearson's fortune. So we get to know many other information. We can presume that Mrs. Fitzgerald came to the house of Mrs. Pearson, and it was a tea time, and after tea and all those snacks and all those things been taken by both of them, Mrs. Fitzgerald, her hobby was tarot card reading, and maybe she determined a bit of the fortune of Mrs. Pearson, and she was about to say something to Mrs. Pearson also related to her fortune. Now there are some difference in terms of their physical features, in terms of their way of talking. We are getting to that part right now. Mrs. Pearson is a pleasant but worried looking woman in her 40s. Why she was worried? Because she was always eager to satisfy her family members. Though her family members takes her for granted, but she was very much eager to satisfy every sort of wishes of her family members. And she was not treated as a boss or the mistress in the house. She was treated as a caretaker, or we can say she was treated as a servant in the house. And it was very difficult for her to assert her own supremacy in the house. So I repeat, Mrs. Pearson is a pleasant but worried looking woman in her 40s. Mrs. Fitzgerald is older in age in respect to Mrs. Pearson, heavier, and had a strong and sinister personality. She is very crooked minded. She is not so innocent like Mrs. Pearson. She is very crooked minded. It is very important that these two should have sharply contrasting voices. Even associated with their character are their voices. Mrs. Pearson, she was very timid She was very innocent, and most importantly, she was very polite. So her way of speaking was very soft, calm, and composed. Whereas Mrs. Fitzgerald, uh, she was a bit stubborn, kind of a lady. Her way of speaking was a bit of a dominating one, and her nationality was Irish. So, in her English accent, there was a bit of an Irish touch in it. So, that is very important to note. And she was a chain smoker also, as we get to know. As we will move on, we will get to know more information about the characters. Now, this is the setting of the drama Mother's Day. Now, let me come to the very first dialogue. It has been told by Mrs. Fitzgerald. So, see this, dear students. Mrs. Fitzgerald collecting up the cards. That means I already told you the tarot card reading session is over, and now she came to a conclusion. What is the conclusion of Mrs. Fitzgerald? Let us come to that. And that's all I can tell you, Mrs. Pearson. Could be a good fortune, could be a bad one. All depends on yourself now. Make up your mind, and there it is. That means her final conclusion is that it all depends on Mrs. Pearson, how he treat her family members. It can go either way. It can be good for her, it can be bad for her. It depends on how she presents herself, and not only that, how she presents herself in front of her family members. Because Mrs. Fitzgerald, she knows that Mrs. Pearson, she was taken for granted by her family members. This bitter truth, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she knew it. She was well acquainted with this. Mrs. Pearson, yes, thank you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. I am much obliged. I am very much grateful to you. I am much obliged. I am sure it's a wonderful having a real fortune teller living next door. Did you learn that out east too? Now, Mrs. Pearson, I already told you all that she is very generous, and not only that, she is very calm and composed. She is very graceful, and she is thankful for everything. Now, she told Mrs. Fitzgerald that, where have you learned this particular magical trick? Did you learn it in the Eastern country? Now let us come to the dialogue of Mrs. Fitzgerald. I did. 12 years I had of it with my old man. Old man, dear students, it refers to Mrs. Fitzgerald's husband. So I repeat, 12 years I had of it with my old man rising to be lieutenant quartermaster. That means her husband was in the military profession. So with her husband she traveled in the eastern countries, and there she get to know about this particular kind of magic, tarot card reading, then sorcery and all this type of magic. She had learnt it in the eastern countries. He learnt a lot, and I learnt a lot more. That means her husband learnt a lot in terms of defense, in terms of military strategies, and she on her part learnt a lot in terms of magic. But will you make up your mind now? Mrs. Pearson dear, put your foot down once and for all, and be the mistress of your own house and the boss of your own family. This is a very important line, dear students. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald, she is pressing on the same thing, that you please make up your mind. You have to be the boss of your family. You have to assert your supremacy. You have to be the mistress of your family. It is the right time that you take the strict action. Mrs. Pearson, smiling apologetically. That's easier said than done. That means what she is trying to say to Mrs. Fitzgerald, that it is easier to say, but to accomplish it in reality, it is very difficult. Besides, I am so fond of them. I really love my family members. I am really fond of them. Besides, I am so fond of them, even if they are so thoughtless and selfish. I know my family members, they are very selfish, they are self centered, they are always preoccupied with their own activities. They never ever bother about me at all. They are thoughtless, they are selfish, yet I love them a lot. I admire them a lot. They don't mean to be. Mrs. Fitzgerald cutting in. That means now Mrs. Pearson was about to say something more, but Mrs. Fitzgerald stopped her in the middle. Maybe not, but it would be better for them if they learned to treat you properly. But they don't treat you properly. They always treat you like a servant, like a caretaker. They are so much dependent on you for everything, and you are always taken for granted. Now, this is the most unfortunate thing. If they would have treated you properly, then I would not have said all this. But the main thing is that they don't treat you properly at all. Mrs. Pearson, yes, suppose it would, in a way, no doubt about it at all. Who is better for being spoiled, grown man, lad, or girl? Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald asked a very direct question to Mrs. Pearson: who is the spoiled one? Your husband, your daughter, or your son? Nobody. You think it does them good when you run after them all the time, take their orders as if you were the servant in the house, stay at home every night while they go out enjoying themselves. Never in all your life. It is the ruin of them as well as you. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she tried to explain the position of Mrs. Pearson. According to Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Pearson, her position is pitiable, very miserable. She acts as the servant of the caretaker, and she always satisfies the whims and the whimsicalities, or rather to say, all the duties that she performs in order to satisfy her family members. They enjoy their time outside, they come in the house, they have their foodstuffs, they have their tea, coffee, snacks, and whatever pleasantries been served to them by Mrs. Pearson, then they go out again. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she is trying to prove a point to Mrs. Pearson that ultimately all these things are meaningless, that she is trying to make them happy, but ultimately she herself is getting sad. Why? Because her family members never cared for her at all. Now, it is the ruin of them as well as you. And according to Mrs. Fitzgerald, it is the ruin of Mrs. Pearson herself alone. Not only herself alone, to be more precise, it is the ruin of herself on one hand and the ruin of her family members, because they are forever dependent on Mrs. Pearson. They are not self-independent at all. Husbands, sons, daughters should be taking notice of wives and mothers, not giving them orders and treating them like dirt. Actually, the reality should be, according to Mrs. Fitzgerald, that husbands and sons and daughters, they should actually take care of their mother. They should not treat them like outsider. They should not treat them like dirt and anything. And don't tell me you don't know what I mean, for I know more than you have told me. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald directly came to the point by referring to Mrs. Pearson that you told me many things, but being your neighbor, I know many other things also. So I repeat this line, dear students, and don't tell me you don't know what I mean, for I know more than you have told me. That what Mrs. Fitzgerald is trying to say, that you told me as a friend, you confided in me everything, and as a well-wisher I want you to step up and to fight for your right, because I know more than you have told me. So dear students, I stop in this audio lecture right here. In this line, I know more than you have told me. I am very hopeful that you will listen to this audio presentation. It's a lengthy drama, so it will take a lot of time to complete this, and I am not in a hurry. I will go step by step so that the concept of the drama be clear to you all. So I discussed up to this. Please listen to this tutorial audio and clarify your doubts if any. Thank you, students. Thank you all.